Jigsaw, there's an awful lot of importance with the work we did with draft 1.1 to ensure that this next feature would work. Bobo, are you around?
I happen to be around, yeah. I need the screen to be shared, so Thomas, if you can.
I will send a signal to...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There we go, I got you.
Right, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep.
Yeah. Good. So, in previous versions of Deadline, we had a couple of ways to render fractions of the final image, because 3ds Max supports region rendering, and of course we supported region rendering just like Max does, so you could go and say, okay, I want to see where the gizmo is, and this is where the max region was set, and it just acquires the same data, and I can change it if I want. I can shift it around and resize it and whatever. But I had only the ability to do a region, crop, or blow up rendering, where a final image is being written, where everything else is black, or it's cut to the size of the region, and then I have to deal with the compositing myself. So that wasn't that powerful, and at some point in earlier versions, we added the so-called tile rendering, which let us split the viewport into multiple regions. So I enable the tiles, and I can change this one to have many scan lines, so I can have just rectangles, and each one of these equally sized regions would be picked up by a separate machine and processed, and then automatically assembled together in the final result. It was like possible, but not very easy, to actually also specify certain tiles to be re-rendered after the fact. So if something changed within this area, for example, probably the headlights changed or whatever, I could go and re-render only where the headlights was, but it wasn't very flexible. So at some point, the idea came, and I must say Mike was very instrumental in the whole thing. He pretty much designed the whole system originally, and because he was working in the automotive industry where they had to render high resolution images with various changes all the time, and it makes no sense to re-render the whole image if only the door handle has changed. So what you see here is one setup of arbitrary regions using the new Jigsaw multi-region rendering feature, where you can go and pretty much create rectangles that can touch each other, or they don't even have to. I can leave a gap here and it will be left black, but if a previous rendering already existed, it will just reveal it underneath. I can easily snap them and so on. And basically, this allows you to specify how many pixels each machine is going to pick up. So if I know that this tire here and the rim are going to take a lot more time, I can select this region and I can change its subdivisions to even more, and each one of those sub-rectangles is going to be picked up by a separate render node on the network, but I can still resize the whole thing as one region or move it around and snap it and so on. So let's say I'll select and delete all these, and I want to create my own quick setup. For example, I have this car and I want to create one region just for the car. I can select all these objects, and if I hit add new region, a new region will be created based on the combined bounding box. You see approximate to the bounding box the brackets of the selection. I can, of course, adapt it, or I can right-click the Fit button, say that I want no padding at all, and then right-click the Fit button to perform fitting. Right now it's actually, I don't think that was what was going on, yeah. Now it's actually, with the left clicking, it creates a region that is fitted by the actual vertex cloud. So it takes like 3 seconds to go through all the, they're not millions, but hundreds of thousands of vertices that are in the scene and figure out what's the bounding box. If I right-click the Fit button, it uses the bounding box. And once I have this and I can adjust it manually, I can go and reuse it. For example, I can create new regions, or I can just copy this one around. If I left-click on this button, it will create a new region on the left. If I select this one again and right-click this button, it will create one on the right. I can continue the same way from the center left button, it creates one up, and I can then snap this one left and right to the size of the screen. And I can probably copy this down and then grab it and move it down, and it looks like I just have to adjust this, and now I have the whole screen covered. If I would submit this one, I will get only 5 regions to render. That means only 5 machines. But since the car will take a lot longer, I can select this one, and as we know, we can subdivide this one into any number of sub-regions to get more machines to work on portion of this. At any point, I can go and split this one into actual individual regions that are individually movable and snappable and resizable. I can select, for example, let's say this guy and this guy, holding Control, just click on the plus signs. Both are now selected. I can merge them together into a new larger region, and so on. So we have a lot of editing controls to actually subdivide the screen very quickly and submit multiple jobs where, knowing that a certain region is going to take a lot longer to render, I can make it smaller or send it to even more machines. And where I know that the background is going to take no time at all, I can create a very large region and this way balance much better the distribution of the whole rendering. All these regions are defined in screen space. That means internally they start between 0 and 1 within the screen. So if I change the resolution, right now I'm preparing for 8K rendering, really high resolution. If I change this one to 640 by 480 and hit the update list button, you see that the pixels are now listed in the new resolution. So all this data can be passed between scenes. In fact, it can be stored in cameras. I can go here and give this a name, my test, for example, and then I can go and say store in camera and say save a new preset. And you'll see when I click on get from camera, it's always using the current viewport camera, so I can have multiple cameras with multiple regions in each. And it shows me that I have 19 regions stored under the name my test by me on this machine on this date, time, and from which max file that came. And I have the previous setup that we saw in the beginning stored last year at some point. It was before SIGGRAPH, in fact. And I can restore it easily, or click here and just select the one that I just created previously. If I export save selected the camera or merge it into another file, all the regions will come with it. They're actually stored as app data within the camera node. So they survive really well, and I can go to the load and save and just save a text file that I can email to somebody, and then he can import all the regions and use them. Once I have submitted this to deadline to render, draft 1.1 is going to pick up all the pieces and combine them into the final output, and this applies to the RGB beauty output, to all the render elements that you might have defined, any state sets that you might have defined will all be submitted with all the render elements, and everything will be assembled automatically without you doing anything. In the end, you get the final image. You can also keep the pieces around if you want them. If you want, for whatever reason, to re-render just one region and then reassemble, but normally we are compositing on top of the previous image. We just select here and say compose all the previous output image. And in that case, if you made a mistake somewhere and this should have been red, but it was black, I can change the material, define the region around, and then only that will be rendered and pasted on top of the previous image, and that will be updated. If I don't want to lose the previous image and create a new one, I can just go here and say, okay, I'm going to pick either single image or image sequence, and I'll pick the actual file name, and then I'll be compositing on top of that and outputting to a completely different file name, so I can multiply the output to have multiple variations. Or I can go and grab the original output from the first pass, save it in a new folder to have a backup, and then just keep on updating on top of the previous rendering. Once I have that first iteration of the full image at 8K for the large format printing, I could go and create only individual regions around the changes. For example, if I select I have here a selection set that's called lower trim elements, which are the mirrors and the door handles. If I open the material editor, which will take a little bit because V-Ray is kind of running through the samples. If I wanted to update the door handles to a different color, for example, this black color, to make it look cheaper as Honda normally sells their lowest trim with actual black mirrors and door handles. In this case, all I have to do is hit the button that says Create From, Scene Selection, and instead of, if I click Add Region, it's going to create one region, as you know, around all the selected objects. But that's not what I want. What I want to do is actually create from the scene selection, so each of the selected objects will create its own region. Now I have 4 regions. If I had hundreds of objects selected, and I can do that, and I also have unlimited undo and redo, so I can go a step back, and you can right-click and go to anything that happened during this session, because the undo buffer is actually stored on disk, and you can have thousands of steps that you can go back and forth. So if I would select, for example, the car, and then select Create From Scene Selection, oops, that was the wrong selection. Let me see, that was the lower trim, I want the whole car. Create From, this will take a little bit because it has to fit by the vertex cloud of each one of the 83 objects that were there. Now I have lots of overlapping regions, and of course that makes no sense because I'm going to render 2.5 times more pixels than I should, but I can easily optimize this by just clicking here and saying optimize regions. If they're overlapping more than 25%, merge them together, and that will end up pretty much being the whole car. If I say greater than 75%, it actually creates 3 overlapping regions, and then I can just go and adjust them and say, okay, this is kind of one region here, one region there, and this will snap here. But as I was saying, I was trying to do just the lower trim. So I select those objects, they're already black. I hit Create From, say from Selection, and say, do you want to replace them or do you want to append? I want to actually replace them. I get this, and now I could just select Compose over the previous output image, render again, and instead of waiting for 40 minutes, which would normally take for a single machine to render the whole image, these 4 machines rendering those pixels, and you see it's only 0.36% of all the pixels in the image that I'm scheduling to render, is going to take about a minute, because max will take at least like half a minute to actually boot up on the slave, and after that it will take a couple of seconds to just render that region. Draft is going to take the original image, paste the rendering on top, and you have, within like 40 times faster, you get your data. But what would happen if you had an animated camera? For example, let's say that we want all those regions to follow a camera that's already animated. I'm going to switch here to camera 3, and camera 3 starts from the same point, but it's actually moving. And you see that the regions are actually standing in camera space in the same places, and that doesn't help me much if I wanted to update those. So if I wanted, for example, that mirror and this region here to be following each other, that means the region following the mirror, all I have to do is click the Track Region button. I can left-click it to do it vertex-based, or right-click it to do it by the bounding box, but I can actually change my mind after the fact, and then just say, okay, I'll be using the bounding box. I hit the Track Region, and this is going to create keyframes on each frame for that region to follow the object. I can do that manually also. I mean, if I select this region here and go to a different frame, I can move here, and then I can set a keyframe there. So let's say set keyframe on the first frame for this, and then go somewhere else on frame 30, for example. Grab the center of this, move it where the door handle is, resize it a little bit, something like this, and then you say set keyframe. And now it says we have 2 keyframes, one on frame 0 and one on that frame. That doesn't follow exactly what I need, but it just shows you that you can animate things just the way you would do with Max objects. The difference is it's not using Max controllers, it's not polluting the scene or the track view with keys. All the data is actually stored in the definition that gets stored in the camera. So each one of these records that you see in your cameras can contain any number of keys in them without actually making the scene heavier. It's just Max script based information. Let's say that I have created all those regions, and in fact my idea for this presentation was that I would get the, instead of using the mirrors and the door handle, so I would be actually changing the color of the wheels. So I could, for example, you see that this region now is locked. There is an X here instead of plus. If I click on it, I cannot actually move it around because it's locked. I can unlock it if I want. I can also delete the keyframes if I want. Just one keyframe or select all, right click and say delete all 100. Now this guy doesn't have any keyframes, it's completely movable. I could fit it to my wheel down there and I could track it to the wheel just like I did before. And I can do this for both wheels and for the other objects that I had. And this means that when I submit my rendering, I can go and pick an image sequence, pick an existing sequence that's called original, which has a certain name. And then in the render dialog, I can go and select completely different name. In this case, I can go and say, this will be called like gold version or something like that. I think I have one here, yeah, gold. I have already rendered it from yesterday because it will take still a few minutes to render, especially if I have many machines, and I don't, I have only one right now. So I'm going to show you just the result, but basically I can render to a different file name here that I'm loading here, so I'll preserve this information and produce a new sequence that is completely updated with material changes on the rims, on the handles, and so on. Here is like the comparison. This is the original sequence with the silver wheels, and I have assigned a golden-like material, like gold-plated wheels for really rich people, and like the Honda logo and the door handles. It actually looks more like a toy car because this color you'll never see on the street. But I wanted to just show you something that shows a difference. In this case, I had only 5 regions: one around here, one around here, one around here, here, and one for the logo in front here. So instead of rendering for 2.5 hours or whatever it would take a single machine to render this resolution 100 frames, if I have a lot of machines, let's say 10 or 20 or 100 and so on, I can get it within 2-3 minutes. I can have my result with an updated animation sequence while keeping the original animation sequence still intact. And that will save you a lot of production time, both for high format printing, like resolutions of 8K, 12K, and higher, and also when doing animations where a single object moving to the scene or 10 objects moving in different portions of the screen have changed because the client changed his mind, or you need to create multiple variations to show him wedges and so on. You can save like hours and hours of render time by just using the Jigsaw feature. We are planning to port it to Maya in the next step, and other applications that support region rendering. Potentially it might happen even for soft image because nobody loves soft image anymore, but we do. So that or life we might add support for it because it supports region rendering. If people are still using it, it will probably happen. We just have to port the whole technique that was prototyped within Max, and as I mentioned, Mike helped a lot with the actual design suggestions, and it was production inspired in order to get typical workflows optimized. That's from me. Back to you, Mike.
Cool. Can you hand me back? Cool. Right. Can we? Can you see my screen?
We can.
Cool. Cheers, Thomas. Right, let's continue. So just to cover off a couple of things from my perspective on Jigsaw, which obviously I think it's going to prove to be very useful for some studios. Is the V-Ray frame buffer support? Typically, it's been used quite a lot in the past because of its color correction gamma usage, and also for people wanting to render out the raw. Or also split the render channels, the render elements out to separate file formats, and obviously having to use those extra functions inside of the V-Ray frame buffer. But I'm pleased to say that that's now fully supported, and on top of that, it works with regard to tile rendering through Jigsaw as well. So you've got all the benefits of Jigsaw there for the virtual frame, for the V-Ray frame buffer as well. We've not taken away tile rendering or region rendering, but something I really should note is that the tile assembler which previously was a binary executable, which we still ship with Deadline 6.1. It's still there, but it is officially end of life from our point of view. We'll be adding more and more features to the draft product and effectively draft tile assembler, which uses draft going forward. Hence, things such as multi-channel EXR support, etc., and reading and writing both tile and scanline EXRs. Those kind of functions are, you'll see more and more of that coming through the draft product, and then the tile assembler product will just effectively become redundant. But we know that some studios have built their own tools based around our tile and region rendering, which is why we've left it in there, because we don't want to break anyone's current tool set and workflow.